I'll start that again. We'll get underway.
This is Brett Johansson.
Order. Well, can we ask our PwC person Brett Johansson to come up to the front, and we'll get underway. Committee members, we are dealing with agenda item 8, which is the draft statement of investment policy objectives and Treasury policies, which is on page 15 of your agenda. I'm assuming you've all read that, plus the attachments, which are multitude. They include the attachment 1 is a covering letter of Treasury policy recommendations, draft Treasury policies, PwC, marked up version, CPA covering letter, etc. So those 5 attachments relate to this agenda item. They're a bit confusing as well, so we might have to explain those on the way through.
Yeah, so there's a number of attachments, and the purpose for attaching the final amended version and the marked up version was just to give councillors an oversight or a view into where the changes had been made. So, and some of the previous policy updates or discussions, comments had been made around, although it was great to see the revised version, it's also useful to see where changes have been made to the existing policy. So the purpose of updating these policies is in response to councillors confirming their desire to move towards investing the 50 million into a managed fund. So the existing policies really needed some updating to ensure that there are the necessary controls and framework to facilitate that external investment and to ensure that really the policy is fit for purpose going forward. So this is really just further development of the existing policy to add some layers of detail around what we already had there. And the policy that we consulted on as part of the LTP was intentionally left quite sort of high, or quite open in terms of being able to go back and provide some further detail, which we've done now. So happy to take questions or feedback on.
So I wonder whether it's worth Jess just going to page 85 of the attachments, and we've got there the Treasury policy recommendations from PwC.
Yes.
They're followed by the draft funding and financial policies, and they start on which page is that?
91.
91. And then you've got a marked up version, is that right? Correct.
Yes, which is the same as the final version, which just shows the changes from the existing policy.
And that starts on what page?
109 to
117, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, councillors, have you got your eyes on these documents?
Just for clarity, let's forget the progress through it. Let's get to the document we're looking at the end of the doc. Which one is it, please, sure?
That's confusing to me.
No, it's not confusing. You were leading us here.
It is.
The liability management policy.
So what the one that we're going to be adopted, I went through these as comments about
The draft funding financial policies. So,
Yeah.
page 91.
Yeah.
Page 91 is the final version that we say, yes, this is the one that we do.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
So, we're working off page of that version. That's fine. So, how do you want to do this? Do you want some comments from PwC?
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely, very happy to do that. So the changes that have been made to these 2 separate policies, the investment policy and the liability management policy, and what we've in our review we focused on the fact that council is forming a DIP, the 50 million of externally managed investment funds, and also then becoming a member of the local government funding agency. So those were probably the 2 areas of focus for us in terms of reviewing those two policies. So each of those actions has an influence on both the investment policy and the liability management policy. But within that, we also brought to the review probably our experience in terms of working with other regional councils and councils in terms of what we say sort of best sector treasury management practice. So these policies have evolved over the years, and so we wanted to actually use the opportunity to bring some other sort of changes into the policy. So there's areas around counterparty risk, there's areas around foreign currency management, particularly when that will refer through to the DIP or the externally managed investment fund. So we just wanted to make sure also that the sort of liability management policy and the investment policy, the framework was consistent with what you're trying to do with the DIP. So the framework in which the SIPO has been constructed is very much considered within the overall risk framework that your investment policy and liability management policies have been set and will ultimately be approved by council. That's probably a high level view in terms of our approach to the review of the documents. Typically, you do find the documents are detailed because it's giving instruction to the office in terms of managing these significant treasury risks that you do have across council. So we just want to make sure that the document was certainly reflective of what the Act wants, but also pragmatic in the way that council can interact with the investment markets, the funding markets, and the financial markets generally to manage these ongoing treasury risks.
All right.
Two questions.
Questions, Councillor Barker.
Who's Phil Fisher?
Right, so that's in the covering letter around. He is council's tax advisor. PwC tax advisor that the officers interact with around council's tax position.
But it doesn't say that he's PwC, it just says the letter says, suggests council refers as tax advisor Phil Fisher. I don't know who Phil Fisher was.
Yeah.
So he's
PwC. He's a PwC tax advisor, yes. Yep.
I don't know who he was.
Yep.
You know, I don't know. I know.
Yep.
Any other questions? Before we commence, we will go through. We will commence on page 91 through, taking any comments on our way through. So, Councillor, prior to that, Councillor Barker, if you've got any.
Yes, I see
question.
that in page, make sure you're onto me here, page 96, Treasury Investments. I see that we're about spending money here allocated. But what I want is an issue here for me, was about the maintenance of the real value of the investment. So if we, for example, put a hand over $50,000, whatever it is, 55 million, 50 million, and we generate 5% per annum, and it comes over to council, and we spend that for the next 20, 30, 40 years, at the end, our 50 million is going to have been depreciated substantially. It won't be worth 50 million as today. So one of the issues for me was maintaining the value of the investment over time. I can't see that in here. Can you point it to me, please? What's that?
On page 36 of this one.
But
You're only looking at 3%.
Can I chair right?
Can I let him ask the question for me, please?
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Oh, it's okay.
So where is it?
So, the question is a statement that states that the value of the DIP will be, the real value of the DIP will be maintained over time? Is that
Yes.
the?
Yeah, where is that?
So you're looking for a clear statement on that? I know it's there.
Yeah.
I've now got to find it.
I
It's,
can see,
it's under real capital value, so it's,
where's that?
page 119, in terms of the marked up versions, the real capital value is the current market value in New Zealand dollars adjusted for movements in the CPI.
But I asked this question
Yep.
carefully before, is that the document, if we approve, which document is it going to be? And I was told
Sorry, that's
it was
tra-
page 92 through to such and such. So I'm looking for it in here. Yes, I've seen it mentioned other places, but I can't see it here. So if we miss it in here, we ain't got it on the board.
Yep, so it's in,
I can help, it's page 92 of the attachments,
Correct.
down under scope.
Under scope,
So that defines what real capital value is under scope, and then
objectives to know.
it defines what it is, yes, I
Yes.
get
Yep.
that. But where is it that
And then the-
investment policy is to do that?
Yep. Looking.
So I can put on
looking.
a 6 runs is hitting the ball over the
Yes.
boundary one blow. Doesn't mean to say just we've defined it, you've actually done it. Two different things.
so it should be in the objectives.
Should be, let me come back to you.
Objectives, yep.
I see all the way how we do risk all of those things you're nervous about, you guys. You know, we're all the other side of it, we're all about spending, how we spend it. But I want to see where's the maintenance of the value of it.
Page 92, look at page 92.
92, up here, what's
It
it?
starts at, read that last sentence and then over to the top of the next page.
I get that, but that's, my point is, that's its definition. But I want to take it from a definition to an action.
Yes, yeah, right. I got something.
So that's my point.
Yeah.
So councillor, you may well be correct that this is more implied than explicit.
Well, it ain't explicit, I couldn't find it.
Well, the cycle.
Shows I was awake
Some-
last night.
Could be
So that's our
Psycho.
first change, I take it on, we insert there, is that where we've got to?
Yeah, look, I'm certainly looking for it.
You can't find it in 30 seconds if you write it, it ain't 30.
So I guess there's a division of labour question between the SIPO and this, because right at the start of the objectives of the Statement of Investment Policy, which is the next item on the agenda, is that council will maintain a long-term perspective to ensure assets are protected for future generations, and over the long run will consider the impact of inflation.
Yes, it means consider it, doesn't mean necessarily do anything about it.
Comment. You can write all the papers in the world, but it's investment policy one, that when you make an investment, if you want to leave your money in the bank, that's what you'll do. It'll also stay in the capital, stay in the bank. If you invest, you want to grow your capital and get a dividend flow at the same time.
That's right.
Everybody knows that. I don't think we need to spend hours on reading it.
What's the spec?
Can I,
The deepest respect, we have had investments where we've come to our attention that we have been spending all of the money derived from it, and that we have not, the actual capital value of it has declined over time. That's what we've had a history of.
No, which one?
can I just,
Yeah.
let's just go back a step.
Happy to take
Um,
amendments.
We'll go back a step.
We'll amend and bring it back to you.
Thank you. That's all I'll sit in that.
We'll go back a step, thank you. I'd like to welcome Councillor Bevan, just in time, Councillor. We're discussing agenda item 8, which is the draft statement of investment policy objectives and treasury policies, and we've just commenced a bit of a walkthrough. We've started off with the draft investment policy, and Councillor Barker has very eloquently pointed out those objectives need to be inserted on that first or second page of the first page of the draft investment policy. Have we got the gist of what, Councillor? We've got that. So we're now ready to move to the next page or two.
Yep.
And I've got Councillor Belford. I hope you don't race too far forward, councillor. Just stick to the,
No, I would just say that on page 93, under item 5, there's a sentence that reads in the last paragraph.
yes.
In its financial investment activity, HBRC's primary objective is to protect the value of its assets. Do you want to say this 5 or 6 times in the
Yes.
course of the document? Is that
Yes.
what we're aiming for here?
What Rick's pointing out, and fair to say, is that you want to be able to grow the value of your asset whilst you're making it low at the same time. And you just take it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, yes, it's
So
it's a simple thing.
I think we've captured that point.
Yep.
So,
Yes,
but,
yeah.
but the same token, we don't want to be repeating it 15 times throughout the document. So that's, all right. So,
Mr.
with,
Chairman.
councillor Dick.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll go back to page 92, ethical investments. Now, I realise that this has been in the plan before, and we may have debated it before, but I think it's worth looking at again. I believe that these categories that are indicated there under 6, there's an element of hypocrisy. For example, an exclusion is alcohol. Now, is there one person in this room who does not enjoy a glass of wine or beer? I doubt it. And likewise, fossil fuels. Now, everyone in this room drives an oil-burning vehicle, or 2 or 3, and there's 20 or 30 oil-burning vehicles sitting out in the yard there. Now, if you can't walk the talk, then don't put it in the talk. That's my view.
A contentious view, I would suggest, councillor. Are there any other support?
AK-47, so I object to putting military weapons.
Well, one may joke.
Sure.
It's worth being aware
Sure.
that in terms of the risks to planet Earth,
Yes.
global warming is seen by many to be the ultimate threat. But in fact, at the moment, it's not.
Sure.
Nuclear extermination is. You can build a nuclear weapon for the less than the cost that you can build a tank. And that's why there's 20-odd thousand of them sitting targeted all over the world. So I'm very supportive of weapons being an excluded industry.
Well, look, we could litigate. That's, if you like, a matter of policy. My question is, should we leave it in as is and litigate that as a separate matter? How do you want to progress that?
Well, look, I expect to be shot down in flames. You want to put me out of my misery dirt right now?
Well, for the
But
sake
I believe my
of
point is valid.
yes, it is. It's obviously the ethical investment section deserves some focus. I wonder whether, in fact, we leave it in at present and set that aside as a debating point. Issues. Take a poll. Do you want a poll on this?
I think we should be aspirational. I drink, but I would like to see us not invest in alcohol. And I think we've got to show some leadership in the future. We shouldn't be investing in gambling, and all those sort of things. They destroy. You don't gamble, I don't gamble either.
Well, that's a good point. Are there any other views as to taking or modifying the ethical investment section? Councillor Bevan?
I have one. Rather than fossil fuels, I think I'd rather see non-renewable energy sources.
Any takers for that modification to fossil fuels?
Well, what does that mean? It's a different definition. We all understand what fossil fuels means. That's, coal and oil. So what does non-renewable mean?
Exactly what it says.
Well, I know, but what does it cover?
Lots of things.
What does it cover? Almost everything.
We're going to be here for a fair time if we...
Marijuana, I mean, I'm quite keen on that.
Well, how do we progress this? Do we leave that one as is and progress this? And if people have got a suggestion for council, where we can feed that in and consider that when we receive the recommendation. Councillor Dick?
I think it is worth a debate, but it's a debate that should be a separate, very separate agenda item.
All right, let's track on because we're going to run out of time here. On that page 93, I'm just looking at council responsible for the following, and it said setting the funding's investment strategy. So we've got this notion of investment strategy and investment policy. Which is it? So what language do we choose to keep in the policy? Do we need to develop a separate investment strategy which is different from investment policy? Or do we simply change the name, the strategy to policy?
Council would be approving the policy in this instance, but as a natural part of you approving your financial strategy, within that would be an investment strategy. So it's a separate. I see that as being
And I
a
think
separate piece of
specifically
the.
within our long-term plan, we've developed and reported on a financial strategy, which we've included a piece around the actual investment strategy. And it's
So
just
that's a real thing that we.
As part of
Yeah.
our financial
Okay,
strategy.
that's fine.
Yep.
Well, the second one on that page that I've got is the investment, external independent investment advisor. You're looking for a 3-yearly audit or review, external independent advisor. That's what we want to do.
Yep.
Turning over the page, unless there's something on that page, page 92.
Yeah, thank you. Up under blended investments, where it goes, the purpose of blended investments are to invest in projects that have combined objective of providing some financial benefit as well as environmental and regional economic growth benefits. I would like to see that turned around so it becomes has the combined objective of providing environmental benefits as well as financial and economic growth benefits. I think that sends a message which is more in line with what our core purpose is.
Sure. Any objection to that? I think that's quite reasonable given our position at the moment. We're okay with it?
Yep.
Page 93, page 94, page 95. Anything there?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. On the right-hand side, the last paragraph under forest investments, just the wordsmith, the last sentence.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
Yes, that's right. It's going to pick that one myself. Do you see that under
Which
the
page,
table?
sorry?
Page 95. Other property investments. We've got the table, forestry investments, and then the last paragraph before NZLGFA, it says funding of general. You see that?
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know what you
sorry.
meant to say there. And
General.
following on from that, under NZLGFA, despite anything earlier in this investment, just some language there that I don't understand.
This investment policy.
Despite anything earlier in this investment policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I-
So the
Yeah, just-
language needs to, the syntax needs to be sorted
Okay.
for that.
Right. Okay.
And stated earlier on.
We're reaching the dictionary now. Great.
Page 96, 97, just sing out if you've got something. On page 97, under 11, disposal of assets, 1 to 3rd paragraph down, HBRC regards Napier Port as a strategic asset and will retain beneficial control of it through its wholly owned investment company. Can I suggest we insert there, because this is policy, that the beneficial control of it either directly or through its wholly owned investment, so we leave that door open. Councillor
Thank you, Chair.
Bailey.
In terms of a messaging issue, is it necessary to put on there in the event it contemplates reducing its interest, blah 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 blah, and so on, because it goes into much greater detail about what the proposals we've got on the table, or one of the proposals we've got on the table. I have concerns that could be sending a message that we're already predetermined as to what the outcome is of those discussions.
Look, I think the emphasis here, Councillor, is on consultation, and that's something which the Council is both committed to and required to do in relation to the asset. I think if we don't have it in here, the risk is we then need to amend the investment policy prior to then, and as part of any change. So we're essentially creating some space for ourselves so that we can do this in the coming financial year.
Sorry, Chair, I would have thought that the policy itself is that we actually retain a beneficial control rather than all the other added bits on afterwards.
Could I add just a thing that I see this document as a subordinate document to the council's long-term plan, its general policies, etc. So those are the ones that dominate. This is not setting those bigger pictures. This is a subordinate document, and therefore you've got a little more freedom to move. It's not the other way around.
Any need to change that?
If there's a desire to refine that and leave it more open, as opposed to articulating in
You'd like
this much
that?
detail, we're happy to revise.
I'm actually happy with it the way it is. I understand the point that Councillor Bailey's made, but I don't agree with it because I see it as in the context of a
Bigger.
triage of documents.
Sure.
The higher ones dominate, and we have
Correct.
to change them, we've got to do it. This is a subordinate document.
Yes.
Happy with that, councillor?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Okay. All right, so we're just continuing on. On page 97, second paragraph on the right-hand side, third line down, it says investment classes of this policy. I'm just trying to match the words you've got previous to that. I didn't see investment classes used, so it's just keeping the language consistent.
Okay.
Yeah, page 98, 99. Right through, I'm not picking anything out there. Has anyone got anything else? I go right through to page 104 before I get something. Is there anything else councillors have got?
Why would you put 50% of your cash into term deposits? This is
Sorry,
on page,
which page?
on the 99 here.
101.
Oh, I'm on my computer, it says 99 here.
99
Okay, sorry, move on.
maximum.
It's,
That's
shall I respond to
22.
that?
It's just stating a maximum.
Yeah.
It's just stating a maximum percentage.
With any one bank,
Oh, it's only with any one bank.
yes.
Okay.
All right, just bowling on through them. I'm up to 104, 105.
Question on page 104, Chair. Guarantees contingent liabilities. We may act as a guarantor to financial institution, organisations, clubs, trusts and so on. Do we actually have any of those guarantees in place at the moment, or is this just in case we need to?
Just not that I'm aware of, just in case.
Yes, broad statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give you some flexibility, but
Clubs want to be interested. I know how clubs work with territorial authorities, like sports clubs comes in and wants to build a building, and the council might. But I'm not aware of it ever happening at regional council.
you could tighten that up by stating a monetary maximum amount, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would assume it'd have to come back to council for approval, full council for approval anyway.
It will.
Sorry, councillors, I neglected to say that we'd shifted from the investment policy
The draft.
to the
Liability
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 policy
management.
as of page 102 to 103. So we've moved from investment policy to liability management policy. Anything on 103, 104, 105.
Can somebody just explain to me at the top of 105 right-hand side, it says liquid funds including cash and cash equivalents and committed debt facilities must be maintained at an amount equal to at least 110% of current total external debt. I have no idea what that's saying. Could somebody please explain?
It's a requirement, so you've got access to cash of a certain amount at any point in time to manage any reasonably unforeseen cash expense requirement. So you've basically got the capacity to be able to access cash on demand. And the way that we've measured that amount that you're holding is 110. So 10% of your current external debt will be held in cash or cash equivalents or capacity within your existing bank facilities. So it's a borrowing limit that the LGFA requires, and typically there to manage those situations where you may need to access cash very quickly. So you've got that buffer amount sitting there.
So did I hear you say, sorry Chair, I hear you say it was 10% of total current debt or 110%?
Well, it is effectively, in terms of the sizing of the buffer, it is 10% of current debt.
Yeah, so I take it then that's a typo in there, because at the moment it says 110% of current total external debt.
Yeah, so it's a similar sort of measure. So if I'm looking at total debt, right? So it's a cumulative measure. I can sort of construct it either which way, but if you look at your total debt that you've got at a point in time, so say for argument's sake, you've got 50 million of debt, external debt, and that may comprise of external debt you've got with the LGFA that you've raised, or it may be bank facilities.
Whatever, yep.
But your external debt so you need to hold a buffer that's 110% of that. So basically, 110 of 50 would be 5. So your total amount of debt facilities and cash would have to be 55 million. If you see what I mean, so 55 over 50.
That reads to me that if we had an external debt of $50 million, we have to have in cash or cash equivalents $55 million on hand.
I think it's a wording.
So it's saying liquid funds and committed debt facilities,
Yeah, it's a combination.
so it's a combination of. So
Okay, so can we simplify
So
by
clarify
saying you've got to
the
have
language
10% cash
yep.
Yes.
of the
10%,
total
Or-
10% of debt facilities
Yeah,
needs
that's
to
a lot
be
easier way to
maintained.
say it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
we'll make that change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Teach them accounts.
well spotted, councillor. Moving on to page 105, I've just got a comment here in regard to the right-hand column, about third, fourth paragraph down, that says the GMCS has discretionary authority. I'm surprised you've introduced delegations at this stage when you've got a separate delegations section.
Okay.
Just a comment there. Page 106.
Put that into the delegations.
Yeah, we will.
Page 106, any comment there? I'm interested to know what a swap collar is and a swaption is. I don't know what they are. Can you tell me what a swap collar is?
Typically, councils manage their long-term interest rate risk through interest rate swaps. They're noted in the Act as incidental arrangements. And the interest rate swap is probably the main product that's used, but you can get a product which is an option on a swap. So it's a choice as to whether you exercise or transact that swap.
So is a swaption a real word or something?
It is a real word. It is quite technical because it's defining the specific product. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm informed. Page 107.
You can remember for the next time you play Scrabble. Absolutely. How many letters is it?
So it's an option on a swap,
Okay.
called a swaption.
Page 108. Now, this is where I get a little bit, in terms of the structure of the document, I'm going to make a suggestion.
Yeah.
We move under draft liability management policy, management responsibilities, and then includes finance and audit, etc. And then it's got delegations. So on page 109 and 110, inclusive of the liability management policy, I'm suggesting we actually take those out.
Yeah.
And because they apply both to liability and investment. Are there any other comments on that idea around the table? Do you see the point? Moving on to page
Yeah.
110.
So
Anything there?
So the suggestion there, and it's not untypical, is where you approve a Treasury policy document, which includes the investment and liability management policy. So
Delegations will sit below
Yes.
and apply to both.
yeah,
Yes.
because you're always going to find in these policies there's some double up, so it's probably a more efficient way to articulate.
We are
Yeah.
required to have both, which is why they're separate at
Yeah.
current.
Sure. Councillor?
Just wondering are you now what?
I'm enlightened. Moving to 110, page 110.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just another, at the bottom of the left-hand column, there's a heading on page 110. There's a heading approving allowable financial instruments. Is that actually in the right place? Because there's nothing underneath it.
Yeah.
Still on
Yep.
page 110.
Yeah.
Change that one.
Yeah, so that'll be a responsibility of council, and that'll be as part of approving the Treasury policy. You'll be approving the use of
Yes,
allowable
should be-
financial instruments,
should
but
be-
it should be a bullet point.
Should be a bullet point
Yeah.
to the above.
Yeah, so that's a typo.
Still on the page 110, on the left-hand column, Finance Audit and Risk Committee. It's got the FARC will oversee the implementation of Council's borrowing and investment strategies and monitoring and review of the effective management of Treasury function, borrowing and investment facilities. Moving down, responsibilities are as follows. In the last dot point, I'm suggesting monitoring quarterly performance. Instead of externally managed funds against benchmark, we change that to monitoring quarterly performance of borrowing and investments to match with those earlier stated responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting another dot point, that at least every 12 months, Jess, that we do provide an audit of the council's treasury functions, borrowing and investment performance.
Mhm.
That's something we talked about at the committee last time.
Yes, I'm happy to include that.
Page 111, 112,
Well, this word here,
councillor.
I was intrigued by this, I quite liked it, that we had a formal set of delegations being here, so they're clear and transparent. I like that. The one that I was puzzled by a little is we put in here to delegate it to our accountants. We're saying the CFO must delegate these things to our accountants. And I presume that's PricewaterhouseCoopers.
No, internally, so that would be our senior accounting team
Okay.
internally.
All right, I'm happy with that.
So we go, that's page 130, 140, 115. And then we go to page 116, we go to draft revenue and financing policy.
I think that should be right. It should be, yeah, no.
Just draft liability management policy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I saw one word here that made my hair stand up on the end, derivatives.
Yeah, so that's,
Sorry.
that
These
header
have now
needs to
got a-
change.
Sorry?
Yep, sorry, that header needs to change.
Haven't derivatives fallen into disrepute?
Well, yeah, and it's an important distinction, because yes, when we talk about financial instruments, when we talk about incidental arrangements, when we talk about derivatives, they're all one of the same instrument. Certainly, they're very powerful instruments if they're used incorrectly, but certainly it's within the powers of councils to use these instruments, but it has to be within the stipulated risk framework, which is articulated through your approved liability management policy.
Did the Bank of Scotland do that?
They would have traded their derivative portfolio, yes.
Within their liability, risk management profile, etc.?
Well, it's interesting because the institutional framework which our local government sector has is used as a best practice example globally, and sort of S&P, the credit rating agency, does refer to that in terms of why the local government sector in New Zealand is so well or so strongly credit rated, is this institutional framework which is steeped in statute, which requires these sorts of policies and for councils to operate within them. So derivatives are a very flexible instrument and used in the right way.
Cover a multitude of sins.
Yeah. So derivatives here would only be used to manage your true underlying cash flow risks that you have within council, i.e. interest rate risk you have on your debt borrowings.
Well, if the Hawke's Bay Regional Council goes down the crash because we've had these derivative traders in here running around with money, like One World and others, well then I'll hold you personally responsible.
Thank you for that. But in all seriousness, yeah, they have to be used with an environment of control and compliance. Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, we've seen examples in New Zealand where they've been used inappropriately. Yeah. But be aware, please, that because they're negotiable instruments, they do change value over time. And this is where there's been a lot of discussion at council level around the negative mark-to-market of these instruments. So that's something that you need to be aware of. They do get revalued. Yeah.
Sure do.
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, I'm just aware of the time frame we've got. We're now at the end of the unmarked version, and that's as far as we need to go, I think.
So, do you have to look at the SIPO?
SIPO,
No.
where's the SIPO? What page is that? I read that. 179.
So just before moving to that, with those changes, we'll bring back a further draft
To council.
for council, and there's an opportunity there to review, come back to it. So now we're moving to the SIPO.
Yes, please.
You're all over again.
Yep.
Right. Now, any interest in the SIPO?
Oh, yes, good.
Page 190.
Yes,
Yes.
okay.
Questions?
I've got a question around the hedging of international investments, which is contained in the table on page 180. So it's proposed that there's international equities constituting 29% and international property 3%, both fully hedged. Have you done some modelling to find out what the implication of hedging is?
Not for this particular exercise. We've been very, very clear in terms of the benchmarks that
Yep.
you're going to be benchmarking the fund's returns to, and they're New Zealand dollar funds. And the benchmarks are typically fully hedged. So we've been wanting to mimic the benchmarks, and certainly our experience with other councils would be it's fully hedged.
So, because I just want to understand what the cost implication of doing that is, because I suspect it would almost render an international investment uneconomic to make.
Well, I think it's important that any performance measurement coming out of investment managers does articulate how much of that return is related to FX and how much of it is to underlying sort of equity performance. But certainly in terms of the growth assets and the expectations around growth over the longer term, you're investing in equities to achieve that longer term real value target rate, and wanting to take out the volatility that comes from currency movements.
If I could just add to that, I think given our reliance on income from the portfolio to fund council our commitments, which are fairly fixed in nature, it is important that we do hedge against movement internationally, both in, well, certainly in terms of currency, and in my experience it can be done at relatively low cost. There's plenty of products and providers that will do that cost effectively, but it just does ensure that we can continue to pay our bills. And
I understand the rationale. I just want to see what the impact is on the return on investment.
Councillor Barker.
I'm on page 192. Before I get hammered for this, I'm at it again. I see we've got in the heading there the word philosophy. And philosophy is rather abstract. It's about us examining our personal relationship with the environment, the spiral cosmos. It's abstract. And I think it's a very powerful word, but in this case, we are not here as a council about philosophy particularly. What I think the word that's there is a policy. We want something sharp and pointy, that's directive. So our policy is that as a responsible public authority, the council's risk advert, the council's policy is that all investments must be prudent, not philosophy.
Yep.
I don't want to see your bloody coach tape or bloody.
No, that's right.
No, just people come up with these big words which are quite often sound good, but inappropriate.
So
Right,
that's,
lovely.
We can change
we'll
that.
call that risk policy. Is that what you're suggesting, that heading?
No,
As
just
opposed to-
policy. We have a policy. The policy is that all investments must be prudent and associated with risk, returns balanced against the key aims, etc. Policy, sharp pointed. That's our policy.
well, the whole document is the policies. This is the philosophy that underpins the policy.
But that's
But,
not
we
philosophy.
could
No, but
use
it's
the word
not
approach.
philosophy.
We could say the approach.
It's the wrong use of the word.
Right, well, look, can we have some
Yes, we'll bring
philosophical
something else.
consideration?
Yeah.
No, policy considerations, please. About policy you're doing.
So we're up to page 192. Is there anything that folk have got a particular interest in
No, I give up
going
after
through? You went to sleep at this point?
No,
Councillor.
I was energised.
The only
I went for a run.
the issue that I'd like to put before you essentially relates to page 199, and it's in regard to our policy on investment, on having an investment advisor. We had some consideration ongoing, particularly in regard to the capital review structure panel, and the benefit thereof of at least annually getting together with the Port Chair, HBRIC Chair and other independent folk in the community to consider our investment approach. Now, so my question is, do we want to insert that as a part of either the process we adopt here or the earlier investment policy, and inserting that sort of function in there somewhere? Is there any appetite for that at all?
Well, could I just respond to you, Chair, and say you sent an email around earlier this morning suggesting that we might want to increase the numbers on the Finance Audit and Risk Committee by another one, so we have more or less function doing there. And I was against that because I thought having two people there from outside, having to go through the tedium and the humdrum of all the other things on the committee when we weren't actually making decisions was not actually a good use of their time. If you were going to do this, I would have thought assembling a group, either six monthly or monthly, for that purpose, to have a useful, frank discussion would be of some value, I thought.
Is there any appetite around the table for something like that? Councillor Hewitt.
I think it should be advisors, James, because if you work with like First NZ Capital, then that you'll have a team that works with you. So that's not just one person all over it, it's a group, and if someone's away, I'll be inserting that S in there, plural.
Yep.
Councillor Graham, have you got any thoughts on?
I don't know about all this. I would have thought that we would be using someone like First New Zealand Capital, but there's no one around this table has got the experience in investing, international investing, hedging, and all these things that, and all of us who have got a little bit of capital are probably using such as First New Zealand Capital and others. There's other parties who live and breathe this every day. I wouldn't have thought we would do anything without using an independent person like that. But is that our thoughts?
Yes, that's certainly our intention.
Well, then you do get all that independent advice, don't you? You don't need to pay extra people to do that because they'll take their fee and.
So I think Neil
Yeah.
was suggesting a group to come together and review the performance of all of our assets, so not just specifically the diversified investment portfolio, but the performance of the Wellington property, our forestry assets, performance of...
council,
Of course it should.
I just worry about bringing in more people, paying more people to do these things. I think that we can do that ourselves. I mean, the Wellington investment's pretty easy, isn't it? It's got capital growth plus pays us a divvy. Well, you know, we all know what we can weigh that against putting the money in the bank or what we're doing in our other investments. Forestry's the same. Pretty simple stuff, really.
Yeah,
Well, I'm actually more concerned about the cash, the big hunk of cash we've got, and making sure that we get capital growth in that cash and get a dividend, which is the simple instruction we'll be giving to our investment advisors.
All right, so I'm picking that there's no great appetite to introduce another tier around it.
Dear Mr. Chairman, to find out who's actually getting good returns around the place, right? And then find out who they're using rather than picking people out of the air.
Do that, and if you know, I guess that's what Jess is going to do. I mean, there's some people who purport to get fantastic returns. I mean, I've been talking to them on council's behalf on other issues, and they always raise that. You know.
So we will be going through a formal RFP process in
That's
terms of
right.
appointing an investment manager or funds manager.
It might be two with our amount of money.
Potentially, so there are decisions for council to make, and this SIPO really forms the basis of that RFP.
Yeah.
So we can actually, once we get approval and sense of direction on the SIPO, we can go forward and advance the RFP, and we can decide the process for that. There's some recommendations in this paper around some decision making there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if there's not any appetite for that, let's move on. And we've got the balance of the SIPO numbering there. You're familiar with that. Is there anything else that occurs to you in that process?
Just going back to the points we raised, because there's a part of this paper suggests an investment advisor, and the next piece, an investment manager. I think, Jess, you were just talking about the investment manager appointment and process, but I'm hearing quite a bit of comment around the table that to have an investment advisor as well is superfluous to our needs.
In total?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing other people saying.
Okay.
That's actually the council's job to do that.
Although we do have an independent person on the Finance and Audit Risk Committee, so we...
Right.
So sorry?
But
Well, we've got a position for that.
Yeah.
So we do
We're
have
already
that
getting
function.
an element of independence.
That's
looking
right.
at it.
Whether we wanted specific skills in investment in addition to that, or we choose someone with investment
Yeah,
skills
exactly.
to come
That's-
into that role. Okay.
That sounds like a sensible
Sure.
course of action.
All right, so we're up to the point you're making here about the need for the investment advisor on page 199. Do we want it or do we not?
There's a lot of brokers that do all this sort of stuff. You just have to look at who's delivering. Who's delivering rather than.
So there's, I guess there's potentially, PwC have been providing some of these services during this process, so there is potentially a possibility that we could engage with PwC Treasury services on an ongoing basis to provide advice around both borrowing and our investment side of our balance sheet. And that's something that we can discuss probably at the next Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting, but we could possibly roll this up into our Treasury policy, whether or not, and take it out of here if you don't see a desire to have that separated out in the SIPO.
Happy with that?
Yep.
All right. Is there anything else? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Page 210, investment manager selection. I think, to my mind, an important criteria for the investment manager that we select is reputation. It's like, have they got the social licence to operate? I'd hate to imagine that we appoint some scumbag who actually ticks all those boxes, but actually is a bit of a, not the nicest people to work for or have the nicest reputation. So somewhere in there about reputational risk or social licence to operate would be great.
You can add that.
Anything else in? Anything else in the SIPO? Councillor, anything else in those SIPOs you'd really want to see in the next draft, which will come to council in a week's time, 2 weeks' time? If not, can we move to the recommendations on page 17 of the agenda? This is on the agenda, so go back from the attachments, back to the agenda. We've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. We've got a decision to make it 2.5, 1 and 2. 2.5.
Agrees to progress the RFP process after confirming an open competitive procurement process. The selection panel composition of all council.
Any alternative thoughts to that? So we just roll that, some deletions of words into 1, 2.5. Yeah, all right. Move Councillor Hewitt. Are you happy to move all the recommendations, Councillor Hewitt? Seconded Councillor Barker.
Is Councillor Hewitt's done it very neatly, but could I suggest in the future that when we brought these recommendations, that rather than having everything strung along in the same sentence, we have a 2.52 selected panel composing of then an A, a B, a C, with me? So we can then go and strike one of the two of them out, and then makes the resolution make sense, you with me?
Apologies for not articulating
No,
that.
it's not apologies required, but I just think it makes it easier for us to make decisions at all.
For further review.
Can they come out a little earlier separately?
Possibly. Earlier than the agenda.
Yeah, just so people get their head around that without this huge amount of...
So we won't include the marked up version. When we come out, we'll just include amendments to this updated version.
Okay.
And we can highlight probably where we've made some adjustments, which might make it easier.
Follow standard process, but there's a lot of work.
We will endeavour to get them out as early as possible.
Councillors, we've knocked off agenda item 8. We've done 10.
It would be remiss of us if we didn't make a comment. I would do, I speak on behalf, sure, of all councillors, that I think Jess and the team have done a stupendous job here, led us through some pretty complicated stuff, and I think we've got ourselves into, as a council, in a pretty good position. Some sound policies, some sound structures, after good thinking and good research. I think this council set up for the future quite well. Very pleased with it.
Here, councillor.
Good job.
Well done.
We've got enough paper we can drown on it now.
So where are we at with, so we're 12:15. The Chair and co have got to get away by
I'll
12:15.
move that we move into public excluded.
Have we covered that or not?
No, we haven't done the HBRIC. Can we do that first?
The HBRIC statement of intent, I think agenda item 11, I think we'll just rattle that one off quickly. We've got Blair here. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance. Very useful. Cheers. I think that's a good suggestion. Are people comfortable to go into public excluded now, deal with the public excluded items, we'll come back out and deal with agenda item 11 after that and roll into our workshop discussion after that? It's all right with people? Yeah. All right.
Someone need to move.
Can I have a mover for...
Why don't we
public
get rid of the remainder of the open items? It'll take no time.
That's what I had thought, councillor, but there seemed to be a move to not
Get rid of them 5 minutes.
That's true. All right. How much is involved in the statement of intent?
Well, hopefully.
Well, let's just roll. Let's take that back a step. Let's go back to the HBRIC statement of intent. We can rattle through that quickly, and then go into public exclusion. We've dealt with those items. Although we've got information items, haven't we?
Chair, so on the statement of intent, this has been considered by council previously and feedback's been incorporated, so I'm hoping that there's no further discussion required, but...
So we'll quickly take it then.
So we're just asking for the committee to recommend to council that the SOI for HBRIC for the coming financial year be adopted.
Been over it several times, Mr Chairman. I'd move.
Okay, well, thank you, councillor Dick. We've moved that. Seconded, councillor Belford. All those in favour of the recommendation to adopt the HBRIC statement of intent will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Carried. We've got two information items, health and safety update. No, there's nothing else. So there's health and safety update. What can we do with that?
Well, the HR manager's not present. I can get him down if anyone has any questions, but I'm also happy to take it as read.
Can we take that as read this time?
I take it as read.
Yep. All right. So agenda item 12, the health and safety update. I've got a mover to receive that report. Councillor Hewitt. Second. Oh, you've got a question?
So public complaints under health and safety, James, what is that about? There were two, page 46.
Sorry, I couldn't tell you what they are. I would need to...
Can we raise that at council? Any other issues around that report? With Councillor Belford.
Question in the number 7 refers to the stress workshops. Do we
Yes.
presently offer a benefit to employees involving counselling?
Yes, we do. So we have an on-site counselling service that gets around on a weekly basis, checking in with staff about how they are going, and they are on call for staff who are suffering stress or need counselling. So yes, that's a permanent service provided to staff. Recent risk analysis across the organisation identified risk workshops, identified stress as being a particular area of concern for staff, which is why we're offering these dedicated workshops to managers to help them to identify stress within their workforce and how to respond to it appropriately.
But the actual counselling is provided by an external provider?
Correct, it is. An expert in that area.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make a very brief comment that even though it appears like it may seem that we're rushing through this particular paper, that the council takes health and safety issues very, very seriously with our staff.
Totally agree, Councillor, and we've got that opportunity at council to reiterate that point. We've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour of receiving the report will say aye. Those against will say no. Carried. Councillors, can I have a mover to go into public excluded, please? Councillor Dick. Mr Paku. Move and second. Those in favour of going into public excluded will say aye. Those against will say no. No. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll take it as carried. So we're now in public excluded.